Hi, everyone. Welcome to LearnTech Asia's Learn with Expert webinar series. My name is Charlie Darapak. I'm the editor-in-chief of LearnTech Asia. Thanks for taking the time to be here. I hope everyone had a safe Lunar New Year break. At LearnTechAsia.com, we're an independent and impartial platform telling stories of learning innovation in K-12, tertiary, workplace learning, upskilling, and reskilling in all communities in Asia. Today's LearnTech Asia Today's Learn with Expert webinar focuses on workplace learning, professional development, and career agility. Did you know that 94% of employees say that they would stay at a company longer if the company invested in their learning and development? Workplace learning is not only critical in your company's performance, but also in employee retention. As an organization, how do we implement workplace learning? How can we increase learning engagement to foster a culture of learning among our employees? Today's discussion covers a wide range of topics and approaches to workplace learning in the context of digital transformation. As technology is making some existing jobs redundant, the bright side is new roles are also emerging. As the needs of companies are evolving, there are recruitment challenges and talent shortages. The potential for skills mismatches is definitely there. So how do we create a culture of learning in the workplace to motivate teams to feel valued and at the same time increase the performance of your business? Joining us today is Dr. Helen Baum. She's head of Center for Work and Learning Research and Innovation Division at the Institute for Adult Learning in Singapore. IAL supports adult education professionals, businesses, and HR developers. We also have Dr. Chi-Tak Phua, who is Director of National Center of Excellence for Workplace Learning at Nanyang Polytechnic. NACE plays a major role in helping local companies in their journey to implement workplace learning to retrain and build competencies. And finally, moderating the discussion, we have Dr. John Fong, who is Chief Learning Officer of Keaton Group, one of the region's leading digital learning companies offering solutions for enterprises. John has a diverse experience in business development, hospitality and tourism, international relations, and education, having lived and worked in Asia, Australia, and the Middle East, and the US. John's passion is education, where he's held leadership positions at higher education institutions and has been a professor at both undergrad and postgrad levels. A reminder to those watching, please send in your questions in the comment window and we'll get them to the stage. I'll hand over the webinar to our moderator, John. John, you can hand the stage back to me once you wrap up the session. Welcome Helen, Chi-Tak, and John to the stage.
Charlie, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you here today, and thank you for taking the time to join us on this webinar. I understand from our friends who are very, very busy in the background that there are a number of audiences coming in from the Philippines. I want to just say a big mabuhay to you. From Malaysia, from India, Indonesia, and of course, Singapore. So really, it's a wonderful audience that we have today. Once again, thank you for taking the time to be with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we've brought out the big guns today. We are going to talk about workplace learning and professional development and career agility. Both Helen and Chi-Tak are experts in this area, and they have prepared a short presentation for all of you. We would encourage you to engage with us throughout the course of the presentation by asking us questions. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll summarize some of those questions and we'll have a short question and answer session with both of the speakers. I'll let both Chi-Tak and Helen say hi to the audience, and then we can move on with the presentation. Chi-Tak?
Hi, everybody. Calling from Singapore here. So, I'll share a bit about NACE, the National Center of Excellence for Workplace Learning, in a bit. Just to let you know, Singapore actually is moving ahead with workplace learning as one of the next round of Skills Future initiative. So as we go along, I'll share some of the Singapore initiative, and also I'll let Helen also share some of the workplace learning context. So Helen, please.
Thanks, Chi-Tak and John. Yeah, good morning, everyone. And I'm really looking forward to your questions later. So I'll be concentrating more on what we mean by workplace learning and how to support it in the workplace. So I've worked variously, came to academia late in my career, so a career change person, and have worked in the trade union movement as a workplace change and training officer, and taught in secondary schools for some 10 years as well. and a range of things in between. So yeah, looking forward to talking with you later. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Thank you very much, Helen and Chitek. And ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we have a whole range of program lineup for you, and both Chitek and Helen will make a presentation, and then we'll take your questions in just a while. So Chitek, over to you.
Hi. So today actually we are here to talk about learning and workplace to retain and build competencies. So workplace learning, I guess, is something that we are very familiar with, or some of you may not be familiar with. But in Singapore context, many of you or many of the companies are still learning on what is workplace learning and how does it help them in their business growth. So I'll touch about 3 or 4 topics here. First of all, I'll share with you what is NACE and what will we do. After that, we'll look at some of the workplace learning and skills gap from the employer and employees perspective. And then I'll share with you an exemplar and some key takeaways for this 15 minutes of my sharing. So about NACE, the National Center of Excellence for Workplace Learning. NACE was established in July 2018. It's a strategic partnership by SkillsFuture Singapore and Nanyang Polytechnic to help enterprise retain and build competencies through workplace learning. We really look at the best-in-class expertise. We learn from the Swiss and the German, who are well known for their capabilities or competencies building for the whole nation through their system of learning at workplace. So NACE in January 2020, together with SSG, launched the National Workplace Learning Framework. So this framework basically is adapted from our Germany, which is contextualized for Singapore needs and also the Asian needs as well. So there are 6 main components, as you can see. We have strategy that talks about companies having a strategic approach to build competencies for the company's growth. Because the company's business growth has to be sustained with a competency building strategy. The leadership is the next one that's important because it's really about the leadership communication and recognition that this strategy is to be implemented. And there must be a systematic and purposeful way to make learning at workplace useful, effective for the people. So planning is important, and training needs analysis helps to fill up the competency bank gaps and also understand what are the aspirations for the individuals to develop themselves and help the company progress. The last 2 components on the left are the environment and implementation and processes, which cannot be more important because it is the environment, the way that we learn at the workplace that help us to learn effectively, and the implementation and processes helps the various channels of learning at workplace more meaningful. So this framework itself is what NACE is actually helping companies to do. And with this framework, NACE conduct training, we conduct consultancy services. The training will help the companies develop workplace learning competencies. Consultancy service will show them how workplace learning can be done using the framework. The experiential trip at the bottom, you can see left, is where we bring the companies to real Germany, Switzerland. COVID-19 now is a challenge, so we bring companies to local as well, where exemplars can be shown to our companies' bosses, our C-suites and engagement people, so that they can then understand how workplace learning can be implemented in a local context or benchmark what they're doing to the best in class. Events and outreach is what we also do, and today is an event that we are doing together with LearnTech. So what is really workplace learning? Many a times when people ask, should workplace learning be formal or informal? Or it has to be intended, planned, or unintentional, aware or unaware of. So a very simple thing is when we learn at workplace, many a times actually we are learning, but we tend to focus a lot on what is being taught to us in a formal manner. But it is the informal part that we learn sometimes very effectively. For example, when you are talking to your colleagues on how you solve a problem in the daily manner. It is an informal chat over coffee, over lunch. But that could be something that is very useful for you to take away. So structured learning, we call it, supports mostly the formal and the way of learning, be intentional and aware, so that learning happens and the employees are aware that learning is happening. The unstructured way happens because peer sharing, group discussion, chats, or even listening to what your colleagues talk over the phone, or they're complaining about something they are looking at work and how they solve it, would be very useful as well for us to learn at workplace. And these are all important components on the framework that helps the company to support a sustainable workplace learning culture. So one of the key parts when we talk about workplace learning is the employer always have these things that, hey, yeah, after I have my team to start at workplace learning, so what do they need to develop into and what do they need to develop in terms of competencies? So it's really about organizational performance, looking at existing and future performance, existing challenges and future challenges. So as the employee tries to align the strategy and the leadership for the skills gap to be filled, the employees by itself, which is ourselves here, many of us, are also looking at ourselves, hey, what am I doing today? And how do I do better tomorrow? Not just to do better tomorrow, is to help the organization meet the challenges and reach the goals of what they want to achieve in terms of business outcomes. Personally, I have some competencies. I also need to know what other competencies I need to build to be a better me tomorrow, and what kind of trainings do I need. And I need to work with my employer. So Singapore actually launched the Skills Framework. Skills Framework Singapore is the ownership of this framework. You can find it on the internet. And from the employer perspective, some things that's very important is to know what is your competencies bank. As usual, when you know the competencies bank, then you know actually there is a lot of job seekers out there. We want to talk about what are the skills they have based on their past experience and how can they complement your competencies bank. The Skills Framework will provide you with the opportunity to understand how your company can grow the competencies to meet branching out in business directions, be it going into another area or going to the adjacent sectors where business are still growing. So employers, that's something that the Skills Framework can help you to understand and build your company's competencies towards the direction by employing the right people or developing the right skills for your company. From the employee's perspective, many a times we actually need to know how is our skills benchmarked to. I am doing well today. Is it well when I do in other companies? So what is the industry expectations? And whether if I'm doing well today and because of COVID-19, my job is affected, is there an adjacent sector that will allow me to develop my skills? And also, what are my transferable skills? So in Singapore, actually, there are a lot of newspaper articles that share about this last year. We talk about individuals trying very hard to develop their skills and continue to serve the industry effectively. So the Skills Framework provides this as a platform for you to understand and grow yourself. So let me give you an example. I just give a very generic, this actually is a real case study, but I give a generic task elements of what on-the-job training blueprint for a service engineer will look like. We call it OJT blueprint, which is a structured curriculum that we can use at workplace for learning to happen. So a service engineer, when parts or a service order comes in, you receive it, you identify the parts required, then we talk about receive and testing of the parts before they go and install it, and finally invoicing the customers. And all these have different competencies that the service engineers are doing today. Now imagine tomorrow when digitalization happens. What happened to each of these tasks? For example, the potential digitalization would be customers' interface to how they send the orders to you and how the engineers order the parts will become important. At the same time, there is a need to track from the company perspective whether the parts come in, when they come in, and the testing and installation, whether it's done properly and are there proof or documentation that can be digitally transmitted to the client. So from the employee's perspective, are we scared? When all this become digital, what are trainings that is going to be there for me? Is there going to be a change in my job during the current scope and job redesign going to happen? Is there a coach at the workplace for me to consult as the companies move towards digital transformation? As an employer, it's all about money, business outcomes, cash flows. How can this help me to earn more money or understand what are my inventories so that I have a better management of my cash flows problem and able to satisfy the stakeholders' requirement for me to grow my business and get more customers. So with that, I've shared a few things. Skills gap, how do we do it? An exemplar. And now I'll just summarize the key takeaways that I have for you today. As an employer, maybe you can consider what are your business model today and what would you want to transform into to remain competitive tomorrow. For the employees out there, you may want to ask yourself, how do you remain competitive to help your company growth, to help your personal growth and career growth, your professional development? And what kind of attitude and mindset you need to adopt to be agile in terms of your career development. Top pick for employer side, you may also want to talk about what is your bank of competencies today. Bank of competencies is just that what you have in your bank accounts where you have money. If you don't grow it, your money will depreciate, and very soon the company's competencies will have lower value. And when you go into transformation, you have some challenges that you have to face. From an employee's perspective, the skills framework also helps you to understand where your skills gap, benchmark to the industry standards. And this could apply not only in Singapore, but everywhere in the world, particularly in the region in Asia. And that's where you can ask yourself, how do I develop new and transferable skills to support company transformation and my career agility? Last but not least, the employer can also look at a plan for my staff to learn at the workplace, how to job redesign their current roles so that we can recognize the staff's commitment as part of the job redesign. From employees' perspective, you are now very senior in the company. You may want to ask yourself, are you able to coach your junior staff to learn at workplace? And do you have the skills required? For junior staff, you're looking at developing competencies, but at the same time, you also want to talk about providing peer support. The informal part of the learning becomes very important because that's the part where you share and you help the rest of your team build up competencies together with you. So in a nutshell, for sustainable workplace learning to happen, you need competent manpower, you need committed management, and you will need a reliable system and processes. If you follow the NACE or the National Workplace Learning Framework, it will give you the guidance of building all these three, and you will be able to make workplace learning something meaningful for everyone in your company. So with that, I thank you, and I hand the stage back over to John.
Thank you very much, Chi Teck. Wonderful presentation there. I picked up a couple of points, and certainly our audience did as well, and much food for thought. I think what's quite interesting is the bank of competencies, right? During this time of COVID-19, certainly it's appropriate timing with everything changing and nothing being like before, it's appropriate that we sort of have a look at where we are right now. What are our competencies? What are the skills? Do we have to pivot? What are the changes that we have to make, and so on? So certainly a lot of food for thought for us and our audience as well. Thank you very much, Chi-Teck. Much appreciated. Now I would like to call upon Helen to join us on stage, and Helen will share her thoughts on workplace learning as well. Helen, over to you.
Thanks, John, and good morning again, everyone. I've got some help with my slides. Somebody else is clicking through them for me. So we'll go straight into the first slide, the next slide. Thanks. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is about the Institute for Adult Learning. As I indicated, I've been with them for 12 years, living in Singapore. And we are responsible for training and developing educators in the training and adult education sector in Singapore. We were first to undertake research in this sector. It was a greenfield site when I first arrived in Singapore. We have the innovation and innovation laboratory InLab that runs a series of an Innov series to spur exchange and innovation in the sector, and also undertakes or facilitates collaboration and matching of expertise for the purposes of innovation for learning in multiple sites, workplace and also in classrooms. But most of the examples come from the workplace. The Centre for Workplace Learning and Performance offers consultancies as listed here. So we provide a range of services for the training and adult education sector. We are now part of the Singapore University of Social Sciences, but still receive funding from Skills Future Singapore. So thanks. Next slide, please. So my presentation will similarly like John's cover why workplace learning, what it is, and I'll concentrate on a supportive workplace learning environment. So I'm going to step back a little bit from the very helpful approach and examples that Chi-Teck has provided, and will in part address the question that's already come up about current challenges faced by companies to implement workplace learning and issues that companies and employees face. So next, please. All right, so why workplace learning? You've all experienced the cost of sending people off the job. It's a double cost, time plus the cost of training. And for many, off-the-job training often leads to limited change on the job, and there are a number of reasons for this. It can be addressed. Learning happens naturally anyway because of the dynamic and rapid changes in all of these things that I've listed here. Chi-Teck gave examples of changes in technology, Industry 4.0, that can also lead to changes in value change and so on. So workplace learning offers great opportunities. Next. So 3 big reasons to value workplace learning are that if workplace learning is done well, then it leads to employees feeling more engaged and valued, and as a result, they contribute more. It very much goes hand in hand with innovation, learning and innovation. We can't have one without the other. And obviously, learning in the workplace is a huge part of change processes and management. Next, however, there are limitations of workplace learning. Power relations can get in the way, personal relationships and favorites and so on. Deep knowing, to develop that deep knowing, often requires time away from the workplace for a bit of reflection and deeper reading and dialogue. And of course, it can only be as effective as the quality of the supportive environment that Chi-Teck has also mentioned. Okay, next. So what we mean by workplace learning, I'll add some other dimensions to what Chi-Teck's already talked about. It's often easier to start with looking at examples, and what I have listed here are examples used by individual learning strategies as they're doing the work. So through doing the work, you're actually in the process of asking questions, you undertake your own research. Hopefully you've been given some challenging tasks or projects which will push you to do all of these things. You'll discuss with a whole lot of people, you'll trial things and so on. You'll take notes and make drawings and photos to help you remember things, to work out solutions, to work out to analyze what's happening and so on. So next please, the next table is where the organization itself can come in with these just a few examples of the sorts of things that can be done. And obviously what Chitek talked about, I haven't listed here, but that also is important. So you can make time in meetings that already exist, for example, to share and discuss and problem solve. The deliberate setting of challenges and stretch goals for your staff is a really important aspect of workplace learning, because that's when we learn, when we're challenged by something. Coaching and mentoring we're all familiar with. Plan time off the job for teams to collectively debrief, reflect, share on project work and so on. And here I'm not talking about the team bonding sort of activities that generally have no relationship to the work that's actually being done. This relates to the work specifically. Studying whole qualifications has been found to be more effective than partial modules and so on. So access to those courses and programs and study time is important. And so that means time is also an issue here. Collaboration with training providers to support learning on the job. So the sort of thing that Chitek was talking about, and the coach at the workplace is an example of that. Job rotation, an obvious other one. And of course, things like the design of the space that encourages collaboration and exchange. That's formal and informal. Chitek also talked about this. So next, the way that Stephen Billett, who's a bit of a guru or a very big guru actually in the field of workplace learning, talks about learning and working, is that they are very interdependent. We learn constantly through engaging in conscious, goal-directed, everyday activities. Indeed, as we think and act, we learn. So this is the way in which we understand workplace learning. It happens naturally. Next, please. So workplace learning is way more than training. It's way more than skills, than a list of skills or a set of skills, and it's so much more than upgrading, reskilling, these sorts of ways of thinking and talking about it. Next. So, as I said, it happens naturally, and you can have positive and negative experiences of workplace learning. So the positive is where people learn and contribute more. Negative experiences will come from a non-supportive workplace learning environment where you learn not to contribute, not to put forward ideas because it's too hard. You get told just keep to what you're doing and so on. So workplace learning is all about learning through and doing the work. And through that process, we can deepen our knowledge. We co-construct knowledge through problem solving. So it is also about theoretical understanding, although it's never thought of in that way. We develop and hone our skills, the how-to knowledge. And at the same time, we also often develop our own learning strategies as individuals. And if the organisation is very conscious in its workplace learning drive and approach, then it as an organisation will also learn in those sort of ways. And for individuals, we develop our identity constantly as in a particular role or of a particular vocation or profession. Which is really important in terms of constantly contributing more. Next, please. So an important aspect of effective workplace learning is alignment of learning with beliefs, norms, the vision and mission of the organisation. And here in this slide, we'll consider the beliefs as they drive the norms in the organisation, the cultural norms and ways of being and thinking. Next. So what I've got here is a continuum that represents two metaphors of learning. And we need to think about our beliefs about learning in relation to workplace learning. The learning is a key part of this. So we can think about learning as acquisition, and the explanation is there, through to learning as participation, and again the explanation is there. Typically the way these things are enacted, that learning as acquisition, things like demonstration, often used in the workplace and very important, but lectures and so on, very dominant in these forms of learning. And this is, remember, in terms of the explanation, knowledge and skills being developed and held by the individual. It is a focus on very specific things. Through to learning as we move up along the continuum of learning as participation, things around sharing and knowledge exchange, through to collaboration, very collaborative work, risk-taking, meeting challenges, and so on. And the supportive learning environment is very much having an environment that involves opportunities for interaction, access to tools and knowledge, and indeed the language that's appropriate for working in the field or undertaking the role and so on, and involves a lot of engagement with others and with those tools. It's highly context dependent. Next. So in my research team, we consider learning as a process that contributes to an increased capability to act differently in the environment, leading to new sets of relations in different contexts. So here I talk about learning not so much as achieving a set of skills, it's about capability and learning to be and act differently. That means that you are able to contribute more, hence the increased capability. So this is understanding learning more as learning as participation, all right? That doesn't mean to say that there isn't a place for learning as acquisition. There's always a place for learning as acquisition, but the emphasis, I believe, it should be strongly learning as participation, because workplaces are very social environments and they involve interaction with tools and with resources and others. Thanks. Next. So another aspect of a supportive workplace learning environment is the approach used to develop your people. Now, recent research in IL undertaken by Professor Phil Brown from Cardiff and one of our own people, Sahara Sadiq and others, has identified a number of different approaches used in enterprises. The two main approaches I'm going to talk about here are the war for talent and the wealth of talent. So the war for talent places an emphasis on a few people who are identified as high talent. And while the rest of the workforce may still be valued, they're not seen to be people that take the business forward. Whereas a wealth of talent takes what they describe as a generous view of the abilities of its workforce. And that means giving many opportunities for the majority of the workforce to demonstrate their capabilities. Next. So as you can see from, actually it's a bit hard to read the legend, but this figure shows the establishment where the orange line, for example, is staff adding significant value to the establishment. The next one down, the yellow, is staff candidates for future promotion, and then the blue or the aqua is staff considered as high potential, and the green as staff who would be difficult to replace. So you can see there's a very uneven distribution of resources and support to these at different points. So along the bottom axis here, you have 1 to 10%, so a very small percentage where the graphs peak, the lines peak, is given to that 10 to 15, 20% of people in the firm. So this impacts very heavily on engagement, loyalty, and represents lost opportunity. So this is something to bear in mind when you're thinking about how to develop your people and how to develop a supportive workplace learning environment. If you focus on just a few, the others don't get the same opportunities, and they are lost resources as a result. So next, please. So next. Okay, so these are points I've made already. So next. Okay, so as I've said, learning happens naturally when we rise to challenge. And that means we need to have some degree of autonomy and discretionary, namely decision-making power. So this matrix comes from a study done by Simon Freebody in IAL. It's a business performance skills survey. And what it does is compares the job task discretion and job complexity. So if you look at the top right-hand corner, high complexity, high task autonomy, this is where you're likely to get learning and growth. Hence my emphasis on providing people with challenging work environment, challenging tasks and so on. But you also have to give them, as this indicates, the autonomy and the complexity to work with. So where there's the opposite of this, low complexity, low task autonomy, in the bottom right, those jobs are learnt very quickly, and there's little or no motivation for learning. The other two can lead, where this combination of both, can lead to degrees of frustration for those people who are keen to move forward and have a real interest in further developing themselves and adding value. So next, as Lloyd says here, giving employees a certain degree of task autonomy would be a necessary condition encouraging the exertion of discretionary effort beyond what is prescribed by the job role. So that's what we want, isn't it? People who are contributing beyond what is described. Next, please. All right, so the final example is a short story where this comes from when I was teaching a master's course recently on workplace learning and performance. So I had the students identify a workplace learning issue in their workplace, and they had to develop a solution to address that issue. So David, in this story, David's a pseudonym, was an HR officer in the sort of workplace that the pictures indicate. And his issue was that the foreign workers who were zipping the forklifts around the workplace, crossing the yellow safety lines and moving really fast and doing a number of unsafe work practices, lacked certain skills. However, through feedback and discussion in his course, he changed his perspectives from one of lacking skills, from the issue being one of lacking skills, and reframed it, his understanding of what the issue was. So I'll give you a moment to read through this. This is from his reflection in his assignment. So what we see here is that in reframing his perspective and his understanding of what the issue was, first of all, he started from gathering evidence, because this was one of the things they had to do, the students had to do. He interviewed a number of people in a number of different roles, and from this he had data to understand what the issue was. So you see this sort of behavior and you think, oh yes, it's a gap, it's a skills gap. But when you dig deeper and work with evidence, then you have material with which to identify and develop a workplace learning intervention that truly addresses what the issue is and is much more sustainable as a result and gives much better outcomes. So he moved from that emphasis on the gaps in people, the lack, to one of capitalizing on the strengths of these workers who actually knew very well how to drive forklifts. To manage them in the way they did, they had to have good skills. What they didn't have was the cultural understanding that in Singapore, unlike where they came from in many of the countries, Singapore has a strong workplace safety and health legislation and set of requirements. And they were not necessarily aware of that. They were not enculturated into those ways of being and acting. So David designed his intervention to address that. And at the same time, he worked with the supervisors because in his interviews, he had identified there was this lack of trust between these workers and their supervisors. So he designed an intervention that addressed these cultural differences, that built the trust between these workers and their supervisors, and of course addressed that workplace safety and health understanding as appropriate to a Singapore workplace. So there are quite a few lessons to be learned from this story. And last slide, please. All right, so to summarize, workplace learning happens naturally. Just keep clicking through, please. Thanks. So workplace learning thrives in a supportive environment, and that means we need to provide challenging work, which means paying attention to the design of the work. We're taking a wealth of talent approach where we give opportunities to all of our staff. And we need, of course, to provide recognition for them. And that comes in various ways. Anything from, oh, that was a really great job, or yeah, that's really good thinking, through to the monetary rewards and so on. The monetary rewards are not as important as that other forms of recognition. And of course, exchange and problem solving within and also across boundaries of the organisation where that's appropriate. Next. So it's really important also to examine our assumptions about how we understand learning, how we understand skills and knowledge, and we need to give genuine access to tools, language, and the ways of thinking. So hierarchy and ways of operating in SOPs can sometimes get in the way of this. We also, as a result of all of this, we will create positive opportunities for workplace learning. Thank you. Back to you, John.
Thought for all of us. I particularly like the continuum between learning as acquisition versus learning as participation. That's certainly worth discussing. Well, the questions are coming in fast and furious. Let's jump onto it. We've got a very active audience today. I think the first question revolves around the current challenges faced by companies to implement workplace learning. So let's take this question from both a company perspective and a employee perspective. What do you think are some of the challenges that these two groups of people, or the company and the employee, what are some challenges that are currently being faced by them?
Maybe I'll just take that one first.
Go ahead, Chitek.
Okay, so basically, when we talk about workplace learning, there's always a concern from the employee's perspective. I don't have the right skills, I don't know what to do, and therefore I don't know whether am I teaching the right things. And most of the time, be it Singapore context or in Asian context, there are people who are concerned that after I impart the skills at work, I lose my job. So the employee's perspective has always been that, but it is really about helping them to understand that what Helen has mentioned, a wealth of knowledge is about learning together, building competencies together, and growing together. In that way, the company grows together with our work that we are growing. From an employer's perspective, it's always a challenge because there's a need for time to be given, and most of the employees in the in a current state of mind is, oh, to learn something, I need to do it in the classroom. To learn something, I need to have a proper person to guide me, or that must be structured. It is really for the employers to help the staff, the employees, to know that learning can be formal and informal. The formal part may not always be in the classroom. It could be at coaching at the workplace. The informal part is where most of the learning happens, and it helps the people. And the leadership need to communicate and help its staff understand. So from a learner and from employer and the employee's perspective, I felt that workplace learning has its challenges and is helping the two to meet together in between and see the value of doing it effectively.
Thank you, Chi-Teck. Helen, your thoughts?
Yeah, so my first response to this question is workplace learning for what? To what end? What's the goal that you're working towards? So here it's about thinking about, do you want a highly capable workforce that is innovative in their approaches, or do you need, because of the nature of the work, so in a manufacturing environment, for example, where everyone's covered in, fully clothed in protective equipment that protects the actual equipment itself, and it's very hard to distinguish one person from another. There's very little opportunity for interaction because everyone's has to be highly focused on their task. There's very high quality control. That sort of work offers and work environment offers quite limited opportunities for workplace learning. On the other hand, within what they have to do, it's critical that they have those well-developed skills. And that applies to the example that I gave, through to things like medical, designing medical equipment and so on and so forth. So again, the opportunities will depend on what the nature of the work is and the nature of the production, the organisation of production and so on. So I think but overall, if you want your workers to feel valued and important and give them opportunities, that's the key, giving them the opportunities. So look at the design of the work, look at the promise that they show. Obviously, different people have different capabilities and different potential, and we don't know that until we see them in a particular challenging environment. So don't go ahead with assumptions. Test out your assumptions about individuals. So yeah, think about your end purpose and think about what will best fit that. And as I indicated in David's story, working with evidence is the key thing. Don't work on assumptions.
Yeah, well said, Helen. And I think that in terms of workplace learning, it really requires a lot of nurturing, doesn't it? The organization culture has a huge part to play to ensure that workplace learning actually takes off and everybody benefits from it. What are your thoughts on some organization cultures that have been put in place? Maybe some examples, if you will. Some research that you've done in the past of certain organizations that have put in place a certain DNA or a certain culture. Maybe you could share with our audience.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you two contrasting examples, both in the field of aged care. So a negative example, one aged care facility did very well in terms of the quality assurance, official quality assurance processes, and their focus was on making sure that their patients were fed and clean and didn't take falls and so on and so forth. They had an innovation. They were very pleased with a recent innovation in terms of showering time. They were able to reduce it from 8 minutes to 6 minutes per individual. But when we understand that within the context of what was going on in the workplace, you go into the ward, it's an open ward, you go in the morning and there's this stench of urine and feces. The patients are stripped naked in their beds. Their nappies that they've been put in because they don't. It's a safety thing for that workplace. Full nappies are put in their lap. They're wheeled in the wheelchair to the shower room and showered, and then wheeled back naked to get dressed and put in place. So that's a very task-oriented workplace, all right? And the workers felt very frustrated and rushed, and they wanted the opportunity to give care and to take a note to, attend to individuals, but it wasn't part of the way the work was organised. And a different aged care home had a situation where they thought about their patients not as a set of things to be done to the patients, but as whole persons. And the purpose was to nurture them and get them as well as they could, and hopefully they return home. And they had one of the highest return rates home of any aged care in Singapore, as far as I'm aware. And they had a more home environment, that they could get their food whenever they needed, just as in a home environment. It wasn't at a set time. They had activities that were, and developmental opportunities for them in terms of building their physical capability and so on. So staff were working with each patient in a very individual way, and that extended them, and staff felt valued. They felt the work they were doing was really important. So very different ways of the workplace purpose and goals. That's why I asked the question earlier, what is your purpose? Why work?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Well, we'll keep moving with the questions. So the next one is about how can workers effectively deliver what is expected of them in a diverse workplace? And together with that, in the same vein, are there some recommended models for workplace learning?
Okay, maybe I just use the framework to guide this discussion for a start. Previously, we talked about building a culture, and the framework has 6 components. We look at building a culture of strategy, leadership, planning, skills gap, training need analysis, and environment and implementation and processes. So this actually provides a framework for the organization to adopt, but these are very high level. Let's go down to something that's very practical, and the people can see how they can do it at the workplace. Like the example I given to you on the service engineer. When the boss came to us, the company's boss came to us, they came to us with a very interesting direction. They wanted to do a digital transformation for the company. So, but what does digital transformation has to do with structured training at workplace? So it's really about understanding what the engineers or the staff are doing at the workplace through a blueprint, and understanding the different nodes where they can do digital transformation. And the staff actually understood the need because it's a business strategy. So the effective delivery of workplace for the employees is really to know what they are doing today and what the company envision the transformation of its company to be tomorrow. And when the workplace is being diverse in terms of different people doing different things, sometimes it is also helpful to look at what your partners are doing and look at also what is our customers wanting to achieve. So a customer-centric approach will be also useful as adjacent roles come together, do a job redesign for a better customer experience. And that's an example that if you Google, Novotel actually works with Novotel Stevens in Singapore, works with NACE to go through user experience design for job redesign using workplace learning as its strength and key focus. So that's something that's very effective because the people are involved in the process and they understood that whatever they learn at the workplace or whatever developed for the job redesign has a customer-centric delivery that will help them to serve better in their role.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chi-Teck. Helen, the next question is for you. Does workplace learning include job redesign? I think yes, to a certain part of it. Can it be informal since it's in the workplace? And how can workplace learning be assessed? I think, how can it be measured? Helen, your thoughts?
Okay. Yes, I think workplace learning, I'm sorry about the background noise. Workplace learning, you need to address job design. And in some cases, it may mean subtle differences. And in fact, what happens is that each individual, if given the opportunity, will craft their role and add to it. So in a sense, they are redesigning the work themselves. So the attention to how much discretionary power and opportunity they have to trial out different approaches that are meaningful for the organisation is a key to this. So yes, I'd say this is really important. Can it be informal? Informal in the sense of what I said about the individual crafting out their role. Yes, definitely. In terms of how can workplace learning be assessed, again, this goes back to what is it you want to achieve? What is your end goal here? If it's about a list of competencies, then yes, you can easily, they are relatively easy to identify. But more importantly, as both Chitek and I have emphasized, it is the culture that will make this work. So this is, I think those employee engagement tools are a tool to use. But you can use all sorts of opportunities, and from small examples of learning interventions, like the example that I gave with David, and in the evaluation of a particular intervention, you can have strategies about observations, feedback from people that you collect, what's going on in meetings, the extent to which there is now exchange from multiple people rather than just a one-way interaction, the type of ideas and the quality of those ideas that are coming through. So again, it depends on the nature of the work and the nature of the workplace. Yes, it can be assessed, but we have to be careful when we think about assessing these sort of things that we're not minimizing it and breaking it down. Workplace learning is holistic, and it involves culture, it involves the individual, it involves the whole of the individual, it involves teams, it involves interactions, and as Chitek was just saying, it's also about the interaction, not just within an organization and across the different departments, but interaction across the boundaries of the organization with the others in the value chain, other professionals outside the organization, and so on. So it's quite complex in terms of assessing it in its whole. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Helen. Well, our 1 hour is almost up. We'll take just one last question. We'll squeeze one last question in. Is there a way to document workplace learning? And if so, how? As a certified ISO company, we need proper documentation or evidence/proof of workplace learning as part of compliance to ISO management system standards. I think this is quite a useful question. It's quite a relevant question. Chitek?
Yeah, I guess when we talk about the on-the-job training blueprint, it is actually a documentation that defines the competencies that needs to be developed, then the competencies that need to be done or to be executed. So workplace learning documentation for structured part of the learning is very well documented, be it the Swiss and the German methodology. And I would like to emphasize that our partners in the Swiss introduce the elements of attitude in our OJT or on-the-job training blueprint development for documentation, because that serves as, first of all, the curriculum, and also how the supervisors will assess the individuals as they perform and execute the task, and shows the competencies they are able to do it well. So that is a good document that we will start with. On top of that, actually, there are many evidence that workplace learning can come with. Because of the digital world today, there are LMS, learning and management systems, which supports bite-sized learning. And that will complement workplace learning as well. It's not just about going online to learn. It's about going online to share what you have learned and what they've practiced, and how can that online content be improved. So that could be one way that the documentation shows about community of practices, sharing among staff, and the platform will allow companies to document it and also understand and track the progress. So a learning and management system provides both a way or platform for communications and also a platform for staff to build up their portfolio, which they will then be useful for them to go for their future learning, formal training, because it helps them to create a portfolio for RPL, recognition of prior learning.
Great. Thank you very much, Chitek. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard from our experts, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if we haven't answered your questions, please do still keep in touch with us, and we'll make sure that we get the answers out to you. We appreciate, once again, Helen and Chitek's time today, and we appreciate your sharing, and we thank you so much for it. So there you have it. Charlie, back to you.
Thank you, John, Helen, and Chitek for this conversation on the challenges and opportunities of workplace learning during this critical period of disruption and digital transformation that is impacting job roles. And thanks for addressing the culture that is needed to make this effective. Digital transformation sometimes turns existing competencies on its head. Learning can be informal or formal. Strategies in workplace learning is also ultimately about doing the work that's needed to be done. Developing employee agility directly impacts business outcomes. We had a great audience turnout today of educators and HR professionals. Thanks for your questions, which drove the conversation. Thank you again, Helen, Chitek, for sharing your insights, and thanks, John, for moderating. And thanks to your organizations, IAL, NACE, and Kidon. That wraps up LearnTech Asia's Learn with Expert webinar on workplace learning. Thanks to my LearnTech Asia colleagues Xiaofeng, Renji, Shihui, and Clara for their behind-the-scenes work in making these valuable sharing sessions happen. For those of you who missed any of the session, we will be posting a video of this discussion on learntechasia.com. I also wanted to take this opportunity to mention that we are currently having a call for stories at learntechasia.com. We're inviting educators, industry experts, entrepreneurs, policymakers, organizations, and institutions to publish ideas, research, case studies, and stories. We also want to hear from teachers. Our guidelines are under the Contribute tab at learntechasia.com. Please get in touch with us. If you found this valuable, please be sure to follow us on our social media channels if you aren't already, and do sign up for our newsletter to get the latest stories and webinar announcements on learning innovation in Asia. My name is Charlie Darapak, the editor-in-chief of LearnTech Asia. See you next time.